Welcome to Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Welcome back, everyone. This is Lantern Voices, a podcast by Lantern Publishing and Media. Thank you for joining us for another episode. I'm Louisa, Lantern Social Media, Digital Marketing Associate, and now podcast host. In this podcast, we talk about animal rights, veganism, climate activism, and much more. In each episode, we meet an author who published a book with us. Our authors are activists themselves, and they have so much knowledge to share with us about their work, the reality of animal exploitation in the world, their studies, or their thoughts on what we can do to keep fighting for our planet. Today's episode is a good one. Oftentimes here at Lantern, we talk about or we hear our authors talk about activism burnout. If you fight for a cause you believe in, you probably already experienced this emotion we are talking about. Do you know that feeling that it's hopeless to keep fighting, that we swim and swim and swim against the current, but it feels like we're not going anywhere? It feels like everything and everyone are against us. When we recorded this episode in particular, it was a very challenging week for many of us. It was a week in which the politics in the United States made us feel a little bit down. And having this conversation with this author was extremely important, especially in that week. And I believe that now, this year, with all the challenges that we still have to face, this is going to be a very relevant episode for many people who are having to cope with all those very difficult emotions. Today's guest is Jess Bugg. In her book, You Had to Be There, Thoughts on Ecological Grief in the Anthropocene, she talks about this feeling of being overwhelmed by the current state of the planet, of politics, of things that seem to be out of our control. Her book feels like a warm embrace. It is like you step into somebody's mind and they can empathize with everything you're feeling. Her book mixes words and visual artwork. Some chapters are longer and go in depth on matters such as consumerism and animal farming, for example. Other chapters are shorter, a page long, sometimes not even that, and they feel more like a poem, a note, a thought you had in the middle of the night. She talks about that. Actually, one of the chapters were actually thoughts that she had in the middle of the night. As somebody who sometimes feels exhausted from making sure that my actions match my beliefs, who sometimes feels like it's time to give it all up, Jess's book was actually really comforting, not only from listening from somebody who had experiences like that before, but in a way that inspire us to keep going, to take time for ourselves, to recharge, and to keep fighting. I can't wait for you all to meet her. So let's start our episode. Welcome, Jess. Thank you for joining us in our podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I would like to start off by asking you to share with us a bit of your trajectory. I know you from your book alone and from some emails that we exchanged throughout this whole publishing process. And on your book, your writing voice seemed to me as like from somebody who is a very observant person and who has a very unique way of looking at things. So you talk about your childhood, you talk about growing up homeschool, you talk about your few months in a regular school, you talk about your experience with chronic illness. So how does all that experience ties up with who you are today and the work that you do today?
Yeah, I I say I'm homeschooled or I was homeschooled growing up, but it truly was unschooled. I definitely was on my own, like out in the woods. Um, and I think that the observation element comes in because it was almost a form of survival, in terms of, like, understanding how society worked at the time and, like, trying to make friends and get along when I didn't really have any tools to do that. So, it started out with just, like, a lot of like, almost mimicking friends to see how it worked, you know?
Mhm.
And, I, like, often felt a little bit like an alien trying to, like, come down to earth and learn about how people do things. Um, but I think that sort of outsider's perspective is still where I write from, you know, for better or worse. That's just sort of where my where continue to stay, you know, and I think it does help that I was unschooled and that I just had so much freedom to, you know, create and write stories and read, and I never got tired of learning, you know, I mean, just based on what I've heard from people who went to school, um, it can be, very I don't know, you kind of lose a passion for a lot of things because you're forced to do so much, that you don't want to, or read books you don't want to, or do you know, it's like you're sitting in a desk all day. And so, of course, you don't wanna do that when you come home. So, I think for me, yeah, I never lost that, like, love of learning and creating, and so it was always just a pleasure for me. It wasn't something I had to do.
My experience with schooling was definitely different because I grew up in Brazil, and we were not allowed to homeschool children in Brazil by law, for example. And even in my own case, the experience that I had was like it's set apart from other kids because I went to a school that was very immersed in nature. So I grew up
Mm.
in a reality that we had environmental projects was one of our mandatory classes. So we had to go like do trails and learn about the native species that we had in that area and how to respect them, how to treat them well, how to reforest them when necessary. So it was a very different experience than most of my peers, even back home, and especially from people that I meet here in the US when they talk about the curriculum and stuff. It sounds very different. And
Yeah, oh my gosh, how wonderful. Like, what an amazing experience.
I was very lucky. And when you described in your book on that chapter, like from going and exploring and doing things in the woods, kind of like by yourself, I remember doing that, but with my classmates back home in Brazil. And I feel like all of us who came from this school, we kind of retain that vision of life, of trying to see things in a little more compassionate, empathetic way.
Mm.
And just now when you said it, I was like, oh, maybe that's where it comes from.
Yeah, that is so yeah. I think, the American school system could learn a lot from that. Um, but yeah, that is wow, yeah. I think it really does, I don't know, just having that freedom, yeah, as a kid and sort of getting to explore and you learn that you're not the center of the universe, that there's all these other lives and souls and creatures everywhere that are experiencing life, and you kind of I don't know, I really do think it creates that sort of empathy.
For
That's really
sure.
great.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And for better and for worse, because maybe in the end we kind of end up a little more in tuned and connected with the things that are happening around us. So that also affect us in a heavier way, maybe. I'm making an
Mm,
assumption. I don't know about like the other people's realities. We only tell so much about our own. But maybe that's why we end up having being a little more sensitive.
mm,
So, with that
mhm.
being said, your book says thoughts on ecological grief. And if you could go into what ecological grief is, how that term came up to you, and well, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I it's funny because when I first started, thinking about this and I was talking to my partner a lot about it, we didn't have the words or, like, a term for it. We didn't know that it was, like, a thing, and I mean, I don't know when this became, like, popularized, really. I mean, I feel like it's been somewhat recent. But it was like we were just trying to figure out, like, what was this underlying dread and sadness. Um, and so I just started calling it ecological grief because and then now I think it's, you know, more commonly referred to as climate grief, but it's all it's all connected, which I think, you know, sort of the term for it now is this grief over the climate crisis and the losses that we're experiencing, you know, with animals and landscapes and ecosystems. And it's also sort of an anticipatory grief, like because of you're kind of waiting for these losses to come that and you don't really know how bad it's going to get or when. And I think for me, it also kind of expands into just living in our current age when things feel very disconnected, and it feels like our society is sort of pushing us in that direction, whether we want to go in that direction or not. It feels like we're just like forced into this sort of rushed and sort of, yeah, just disconnected way of life. And yeah, it's just hard, it doesn't feel natural, and it it doesn't feel like where we should be as humans. So yeah, I think a lot of my grief comes from that as well.
Do you feel like in your life you've met people? Have you spoken with people that can resonate with that feeling?
Yeah, for a long time, when it really started when I went vegan and my partner went vegan, and we really felt alienated. And we didn't know any vegans around us. So that's sort of where it started. But then when I went to grad school and I was studying sustainability and, nature, culture, sustainability, a lot of like my cohort was experiencing the same thing, and the professors. And it was like so nice to kind of be able to talk about it more openly. And it was like, oh, okay, like here are all these people, and we're all here because of the same reason. We all came to this program and have like we're all here for it's the same interest. We're all like worried and kind of sad, and we don't know what to do and we're trying our best.
But we are recording in a very tough week, in a particularly tough week. So I feel one of the things that I feel living in New York City, living in a city that it's been kind of a bubble in a way, because everybody is more welcoming and more supportive in that sense. I feel like this week and the past few days have been one where I found support in my neighbors and in communities I didn't even know I had here. So finding other people that are going through the same feeling has been really helpful. And I imagine that that's something that you found on your graduation, right? Was it graduation, a master's degree? I didn't grad that.
Oh yeah, it was grad school. Yeah, a
Yeah,
master's degree.
master's degree.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, maybe
Yeah.
it's something that you find there, because I can only imagine if I work with lanterns books that have that appeal, but working with like scientists and people who have been telling everyone that it's time to take action for the past 30 years, 40 years.
I know.
I can't imagine how that must feel like.
It's so tiring. It's like, I mean, I wish I had a better wish I could be more hopeful, but yeah, as you said, it is a very tough week this week in America. And I think it's like I'm trying my best to stay positive, but ooh, I feel really defeated.
I will use a quote from your own book, actually, because that one is one that resonated with me, and I'm going to try not to let our listeners down too much. So.
Yeah, we'll get it back up. We'll get it back up.
There is a quote that says, "We must find meaning in action itself without the hope of a solution." I
Mhm.
I was reading that at the laundromat, fun fact, and I was sitting down, just reading the book, waiting for my clothes to be done, and I looked at it, I closed the book, and I had to sit with myself and think about it for a little bit, because it sounded very profound. The idea that we must keep going and finding meaning in our everyday actions, and even if we don't see results right away, but it's also a little bit challenging and sometimes like requires a lot of mental energy. So can we go deeper in that thought for a little bit?
Yeah, it is a little bit depressing, isn't it? It's a little bit dark. Um, but there is something hopeful there, the way I look at it, or I guess my mindset with that is, we're kind of like you said, we've been told for so many years, take action, and it's just sort of this like, and nothing's happening. And we're just sort of like waiting and waiting, because I think, I mean, I know this is a problem everywhere, obviously, but at least with our country, policies seem to be really reactive, not there's not a lot of forethought. It seems to be like, oh, this thing's happening, let's react to it. There's not a lot of thinking of the future. um and so I think where we are now, I mean, okay, so scientists have told us, hey, the deadline is passed. And that's all we know really right now. And things can change and who knows what will happen. But I guess it's helpful for me to look at it as like, okay, well, now we're not trying to chase a runaway train. We're not trying to like stop this. It's like, okay, but there's still a lot to do in the aftermath of a crash of a train, which I know it sounds so dark, but I'm trying. There's a good thing here. It's like there's still so much work to do, and there's still so many ways to ease suffering and help. And I know this is another dark, dark analogy. But I think of it as like, one thing we know as humans is that we will die one day and we don't know when, but that doesn't stop us from taking care of ourselves and taking care of our neighbors and, trying to live the best life we can. So it's almost like if you look at it that way and think smaller and like what you can do and what makes you feel good and easing the suffering around you, it's like, what else is there? It's like we're doing the best we can and we don't know when things are going to really, things are pretty bad. We don't know exactly, we don't have an exact understanding of how bad or what's going to happen. So we're still just got to keep going and keep living and keep trying and easing suffering.
Lantern Publishing and Media is devoted to sharing messages of compassion. Our books inspire a better world by telling the stories of animal rights activists, climate activists, and their fights for a world where everyone can live in harmony, no matter their species. Lantern is a 501c non-for-profit organization. Your donation helps us keep our work going. If you can, go to lanternpm.org/donate to help us with any amount. Once again, the website is lanternpm.org/donate. Your generous gift enables you to support our collective mission to inform, inspire, and educate. Thank you very much. You have grief on the title of your book. So it is not something light to talk about. But you mentioned now something about having smaller actions, acting in little things in your own communities and stuff. Do you have any good news, any good examples of things that happen in your life or have been happening in your life in that area?
Yeah, gosh, I feel like one thing, kind of to go back to what we were just talking about as far as like culturally here, it's very like these big, massive gestures of, at least that's like what we're presented with, it's like fly across the world and save a polar bear or like go on these sort of like, um, ecotourism trips and do all these like big things. But there are so many, small everyday actions. I always am tempted to tell people do less, as in slow down. So much of what got us here in the first place is this sort of unchecked more, rush, rush, rush. Let's just keep acting without thinking. And I feel like so much of it is almost unconscious. We're not coming from a place of awareness of like, oh, is this something we need? Or is this something that culturally I've just been programmed to do and want and, act on? And so I feel like there are just so many almost insignificant to say it. And I feel like people want more, grandiose examples. But I really feel like slowing down, being observant, it's like helping an injured bird, moving a caterpillar off a hot sidewalk. These are actions. These help, they make a difference to whatever creature you're helping, but it makes a difference to you. It's like these things are meaningful. They create mindfulness. It all matters. And I just feel like, there's so many awesome community projects, like the neighborhood that we moved into a few years ago. There was like a little like wildlife area down the street that the city was trying to turn into like kind of continue the neighborhood and build condos. And this happened all before we even moved here. So, I mean, I had no involvement, but I feel so lucky to benefit from it. But the community in this neighborhood got together and made it a wildlife preserve. And so there could be no building on it, and it's like several acres of just hiking trails, and it's like, oh, great. It's just there's so many things like that you hear about all the time that make a difference to your daily life. But I just think it's so important to not, lose track of these little things that you do every day that stop you. And I mean, because those really do help with grief, you're making a difference. You're just even slowing down your heart rate. It's like you're just slowing down. Maybe don't order that thing on Amazon because you have an impulse. It's like maybe just, do less.
Yeah, I like what you said that it's the smaller actions that make the most impact in our well-being and all that. And I was thinking two things. One, you mentioned about the reservation that they just created in your neighborhood. And that reminded me when I was in college, I had the opportunity to go to Japan for a month-long trip to be immersed in the culture and learn more about Japanese lifestyle. And one of the first things that I noticed in Japan is how more compared to the style I grew up in, and I knew how much more connected to nature that they lived. So you would go in Tokyo, you would be walking to like a busy crosswalk, like the busiest crossing of pedestrians in the entire world. And then a few blocks down, there was a natural preserved landscape with acres and acres of just woods. It's very interesting to see how they have this relationship with respect with nature that we are just learning to have now.
Oh my goodness. I had a really big awakening in Japan too. I did a lot of camping there and I felt the same. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, like, I went to a national park there and I remember hiking, and the way I just in and it's I just feel like national parks in the US, it is so focused on this feeling of conquering. People are trying to go off the trails and climb these big mountains, and it's like, go, it's like push through, like get to the top is the vibe. In Japan, I noticed everyone is so respectful. People are not going off the trail. Everyone is staying very quiet. You're not going to have someone riding by with a Bluetooth speaker
Yeah.
blasting. Happens every time I go on a hike here. But I just was so in awe of, like, oh, it's much more respectful of just the quiet, like even just being quiet and just like not disturbing anything, and not, you don't want to step on a plant, you don't want to veer off the path. Everything is like, yeah, it was just, I had a really similar experience and it was amazing to see.
100%. It's far away from us. It is a different cultural upbringing than we have in the West, but it's just, I don't know. I feel like if you've been there, you know what we're talking about. And it's something that will be great for us to have here. Even back home in Brazil, where my hometown was known for being an ecological city, it was known for having
Mm,
more connection with like nature and stuff. It's still not the same type of relationship. And I'm going to veer in another tangent here because I thought it was so interesting how you said about the whole spirit of conquering, of going there and like take it is exactly like that. I never noticed before, but yeah, that makes so much sense.
now you won't be able to not notice it and it'll be so tiring to you.
Maybe, but it
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense how
Mhm.
people isolate, and that's something you talk about in your book, like how people isolate nature, and they have it at something that
Mm,
you go and you visit, and then you come back and
exactly.
bringing back to the second point, that is the smaller actions and the smaller things that we can do in our daily lives. Of course, it's going to be different what I can do living in a big city than what some of our others, for example, that live in farm sanctuaries are doing. So it is different, but um, I don't know. I've been so embraced by my neighborhood and my neighbors in this week alone that it gave me a lot of hope And people I don't know. It's just like the family that takes care of the little fruit vending that they have. They're 24 hours. They're always open, and they always say hello and goodbye. And it's just like they stop and they ask how you're doing. Um, I they speak Arabic, I think, and their English goes up to a certain point. Mine go to a certain point as well, and then we're just like trying to understand each other, but we're just being kind and welcoming with one another, and that makes a lot of difference.
Completely.
Yeah, and seeing the work, like the community gardens that they have here and the spaces for that also brings hope. Brings hope that we can continue to resist, continue to do our work, even if everything else seems to be an obstacle in our way.
Completely.
We know the vegan activist community is out there, and we want to connect with each and every one of you. We are proud supporters of initiatives that fight for a more compassionate world for all animals, humans and non-humans alike. For more content on vegan activism, follow Lantern on social media. We are Lantern Publishing and Media on Facebook, at Lantern PM on Instagram, and at Lantern PM Official on TikTok. And the next topic that I had here, which is the visual artwork in your book. And we have some pieces that dialogue with the text in one way or another. So I was wondering, did you make all of them? How was the process of deciding that this piece goes with this one? Which one came first? Which one came last? Like, how was this whole idea of having something so visual with words that are more spiritual in a way?
Yeah, I did create all the artwork for the book. You know, all of them were different. Some came first, then the writing, and vice versa. And I was like, in some I had done, you know, even a couple of years ago because of something I read that ended up making its way into the book. I kind of tried to piece together where they made the most sense to me, but at the same time, I feel like each piece could also just be its own story in a way. For me, creating art is so helpful when it comes to this kind of thing. Like, I might read like some, you know, climate crisis paper or something about chemicals or something that's just very like, it's a lot to take in and it's a lot to process. And sometimes creating visual art that goes with it or reflects how I feel about it is a way for me to process it. You know, it goes down a little easier, or at least it helps me sort of take in the information and then do something with it and not just sit with it, or feel like I'm kind of regurgitating the information. You know, it kind of helps me work through some emotions. And I kind of hoped that that might be some sort of, I don't know, almost like a nice break for the reader in a way, or some kind of like, oh, like a moment to reflect on something and, you know, just sort of another way of processing, you know, like I'm definitely a visual learner too. So it's like that kind of stuff, like it helps it stick to your brain a little bit better.
I felt like the pieces they come at the end of the chapters, and I felt like they came exactly the moment that I had to sit down with an idea. So I had to
Mm.
stop and think. So it was good to like see the images while I was digesting what I just read. In a way, it's a form of coping with everything, just like you said. So maybe for you, doing the artwork was a way of self-care, of making a difference. And for the reader, so the reading wouldn't be so harsh on us from the things that we were saying. That was a breathing. So it's interesting how it
Yeah.
translated for us reading.
Yeah. Sorry about all that text. Here's something to look at.
It makes sense. I think it would be like that if it would be a random, I don't know, a picture of a cute little dog that doesn't, it's not related with the text at all. That would be like, I'm sorry, here's something adorable for you to relax a little bit.
You know what? That's actually, maybe I should have gone that route. That might have been better.
No, I think that the way it is just perfect because you're still sitting with the idea, but at least you're having your own time to digest it. It's a good time if maybe you're not ready to move on to a new idea, a new chapter. You can stop right there and take a walk or go do carry your day and then come back to your reading later. So I really like that. I thought it was well built.
Thanks.
I'm suspicious to say I love when we mix different types of art in a single medium. So personally, I really like that.
I love hearing that. Like, I also my brain just doesn't work in any other way. I have to do various things to make, like, my brain work.
I'm a crafts type of person as
Mm.
well. So yeah, I have my coloring books. I have my scrapbooks and stuff that I just sit down and work with. And I try to do meaningful things with it just because it's something I enjoy. So I try if I'm doing like a coloring book, I try to make something that I can put on my wall later. Or if I'm doing collage or scrapbooks, I try to turn it into a planner for next year. I usually spend the last 6 months of a year doing my planner for the next year just because it's
Yes.
relaxing.
I have this, like, kind of like a whiteboard where it's like I write out my calendar for the month, and my favorite thing to do is when it's a new month and I wipe it down, and then I spend all my time decorating around the border and, like and then I'm like, "Ugh, now I have to fill it in." Like, I don't like that part. I just wanna have something to look at this month.
Yeah, it's all about balance. That's what my mom used to tell me. It's all about balance.
Exactly.
One of the chapters that I like the most, and me and my colleague Megan, we work together at Lantern. We do a lot of the social media stuff together, and we were talking about this chapter in particular, which is the checklist that you edit on the book. We actually are going to do. You'll see probably by the end of this month. Me trying not to date the podcast and saying the end
Oh,
of the month, but we were probably going to do a little TikTok video and reels with that chapter. But that's because we could resonate a lot with it, even though we have very different lives, very different like family situations going on right now. For both of us, reading that checklist, we're like, yes, yes, at least 5 of those items are constantly in our brains. So I was wondering, where did that list come from, and why do you think everyone, at least 2 of us, can resonate that much with it?
I love hearing this, and I love that you resonated with it because it's such a funny, weird thing. That checklist was actually so when I was working on my thesis, I had this document where I kept, like, almost like journaling, like I was brainstorming and trying to come up with ideas because I hadn't decided what I would write about, and I was just kind of, like, keeping this document, and then I thought, I'm just gonna write down everything that, like, at the moment is keeping me up at night." And so I just was and it was all part of just, like, brainstorming to get ideas. And I wrote out that list, and that's why it's kind of funny. The list also talks about it's, like, a lot of really hard, it's, like, atrocities and horrible things that keep me up, but then it's also, like, something embarrassing I did over a decade ago. And I put that in there because I was, "Oh, that is just how ridiculous the brain is, that it, like, doesn't know." It's like obsessing about something embarrassing and something that is actually horrifying and worrisome, and it just ricochets back and forth, like, while I'm trying to fall asleep. And so I really just can't sleep, this is what's happening. And it was funny because I had shared the document with my thesis committee, and I was like, "Oh, I'm trying to come up with an idea, like, something that is kind of bothering me." And then someone on my thesis committee really liked the list. "Oh, this list itself is like I like this." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, like, that's interesting." And so I always just kind of kept that list. And then when I was working on this book, I was, "Oh, yeah, this is where it goes."
It's thoughts that keep you up at night. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, I see why it resonates so much.
Yeah. Yeah, like, that is when, your head hits the pillow and you're, "Oh, I can't wait to fall asleep." And then it's just your brain is, "Nope, let's go over everything."
Yep, yep. And did the list help? Did you manage to fall asleep after that?
No. I wish I could say yes. I wish I'm just gonna be honest, now the list is probably 10 times longer.
I'm so
Now there's
sorry.
new problems to think about, but it does help though to, write them down and get them out, like, try to get them out of your mind.
I'm asking questions like this because it really depends on the person. We talk about crafts, we talk about making like good actions, and we're talking about writing now. So all of those, in a way, are coping mechanisms There are ways
Yeah.
for us not to spiral on our own in our own brains, but bring this to the outer world and try to do something about it.
Yeah, for sure.
And in a way, after you wrote your book and you laid all those thoughts down, I want to know, if do you feel like you found ways to cope with ecological grief? Is this also an everyday action that we must find meaning within?
I love that. Yeah. I love that. Yes, find meaning in your grief. That means something's important, right? I mean, it means that it's worth grieving. But yeah, I mean, all the things, I kind of lay out a lot of stuff in the book, like I was saying, with the sort of doing less and kind of slowing down, not eating animals, not ordering a bunch of stuff you don't need, not doing like just doing less and the small actions. Those are just things I've found that help me, It's like, even if I feel like, "Oh, the day's a waste, I did nothing," I'm like, "Okay, well, I didn't do a lot of things too. I didn't do a lot of things that contribute to suffering, so that's a win," you know? It's like, it really can be small. It doesn't have like, you don't have to feel I don't know, I just think it's so overwhelming, and every time I watch a documentary or listen to a podcast or read a book and there's all these action items, I appreciate it and I know it's important, but it is also, we're living in a really weird time and we're like really fighting the current. You know what I mean? It feels like we're swimming upstream and it's really, really tiring and it's important to take care of yourself. And so that's why I feel like, okay, let's look at ways that we can just stop some of the flood rather than just trying to get out there with buckets all the time, trying to like scoop the water out. It's like, okay, let's just lessen a little bit of that by doing a little bit less. Which I just feel like sometimes when things are rough, that's just kind of a helpful thought because it just takes off some of the pressure, but you're still doing something.
Yeah. I agree with you. In this podcast so far, we're still starting it, but I've had the opportunity of speaking with people from many different sides of activism and many different generations of activism, which is something I truly appreciate. And one of the things that I feel for us, and especially working with social media, that I'm in constant contact, like with content that activists, younger activists post. A lot of the pressing issues that I see right now, it's the feeling of overwhelming, the feeling of there's too much going on. I need to also take care of myself. How can I keep going if I'm now feeling bad about myself because I ended up buying something from fast fashion, because I needed something to keep me warm from the crazy winter that we had. And I just cannot afford to go somewhere
Mm.
else. And then people start feeling guilty about that. And some people feel like, oh, no, this is one thing. So I'm already all wrong. So I'm just going to go back to doing all wrong again. And it's understandable. It's hard some days.
Yeah, and when I say like, doing less and all of that, it's important. Like, I love what you said about like, oh, like sometimes that's the only option, or you're like, I feel bad about myself because I did this thing that doesn't align with my ethics. But then you're like, it is a very easy thing to fall off. It's like why we always start things on New Year's and Monday. It's like, oh, I have to start all over, or oh, I just will scrap that. It's like it's all or nothing. And that is just not the way humans work. Like all the things I say in the book, it's like I'm telling myself that. I'm telling myself as much as anyone else. It's like I'm constantly having to tell myself it's okay or to be like, it's fine. You didn't do it. It's like, just let it go. It's like, it'll be okay. Just try again tomorrow. Try again right now. We're doing the best we can. It's when we're, again, swimming upstream and we now, especially now, have politicians that are going to make it really hard for us. And it's individuals fighting pretty big monsters. So it's okay to be tired and take a break. And like, even when I was writing the book, I had a lot of really tough things going on. And there were so many times where I was like, I can't even care anymore. Like, I just can't care. And then it's like, that's why it's helpful to kind of build these small little habits when you're doing okay. because then it's like it just becomes who you are. And then when you're like, I don't care, you just kind of do it anyway until you care again. But it's okay to not, it's like life is really hard. Life is so hard. And then to add on all the things that we're dealing with now these are very bizarre times that uh, there's no words. So yeah, be gentle with yourselves. It's okay. It takes a lot of little actions over time.
Hi there, I'm Hope Bohannick, host of the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. Join me on a journey to uncover the heartbreaking and heartwarming aspects of living vegan. My guests cover a variety of issues, but I like to focus on ethics, chickens and sanctuaries, the environment, anti-oppression activism, and the reasons for living vegan. If this sounds good to you, come check out the Hope for the Animals podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I've been vegetarian for so many years now that it doesn't make a difference in my life anymore. It's something like in a bad day that I crave ice cream, I'm not going to crave like a chicken or something, never, because it's just not part of my reality anymore. It's a habit that I've developed in the past 16 years. Yes, thank you. That's a very good advice. That makes a lot of sense, at least to me, to create those little things. Because in the end, it's even with our smaller actions and with individual actions like we're doing, we're not the ones who are making the higher impacts and the higher damages to the world. The people who are, they are the ones who need to do that every day. And they're the ones who can afford to do that every day.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they're the least likely to do it every day.
We keep pressuring. It's funny. It was very good reading your book with my colleague Megan, because we ended up going back and forth. We have monthly social media meetings that we gather to just brainstorm ideas for Lantern's social media and public outreach in general. And when we were talking a lot about your book and the posts that we were going to do and things like that, and we were communicating about this as well, about how those smaller actions, those things count.
Yeah. And even, so many people love to tell me that, oh, well, being vegan doesn't make a difference. And it's like, what do you think you're accomplishing? You're just making it harder. But that's one of those things where it makes a difference to me. Like, I feel better. And obviously you are making an impact. It's just small, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable. It's like what I was saying. It's like moving a caterpillar off the sidewalk. Well, that makes a big difference to the caterpillar. So good enough for me.
And I keep thinking, it's a cliche, but I keep thinking of the butterfly effect. We don't know what's going to happen with a caterpillar and how it shape its life, and literal butterfly effect. So
literal butterfly effect. I love that.
Before our time is up, before I let you go, and I want to know if you have any messages, any projects, anything that you're working with that you like to tell listeners about.
Yes. So I'm working on creating courses, and I hope by the time this comes out, they might already be up on my website. So my website is just jessbugg.com. And I am creating courses that reflect a lot of the reading, in my book. And so I'm making one on sort of an introduction to new vegans, people who are just a practical guide, or people who are just curious, just kind of step by step. It's all self-paced. And then I'm doing one on sort of chemicals that are allowed in the US, that are outlawed other places, and what they do to us and how to avoid them. And then I'm also creating a course on a lot of what we talked about, actually, with creating art, sort of visualizing the climate crisis in a way. And so it's sort of giving you prompts here's some information. How are you processing it? how can you create art from it? So yeah, I'm working on these courses. I'm excited. I hope that people will find them valuable. But yeah, other than that, like I guess my website's a good place to go for anything new that's happened with me.
We'll add it to the show notes so people can
Oh,
go in
awesome.
the
Yay.
description and check it all out. I love everything that you said about it so far, so I'm definitely going to keep an eye out myself.
Oh, yay.
And we will always, like, if you have anything going on, not even if it's your own projects and your book is there, let us know. We'll share on social media as well, because it's a whole community. We're strengthening each other.
Yeah, awesome. I love that.
That is what we got going on for today. So thank you very much, Jess, for being here at
Yeah,
Lantern
thank
Voices
you.
with us. Thank you for this conversation. It was a hard conversation in some moments, but it helped seeing things from a perspective that is very empathetic, I feel. So it's something very important. For me, it's something that it was a conversation I needed this week. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was so nice talking to you. It's good to get it out this week.
Yes, yes. And in the new year that's coming up, I'm sure this episode in particular is going to be very relevant for a lot of people.
Yeah.
We are
I'm
going
like,
to
I
be
wish it
okay.
wasn't. I know, I'm like, I wish it wasn't relevant, but okay.
But since we need it, it's good that it's out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a good way to
Oh,
look at it.
thank you once again, and
Yeah,
we'll
thank you.
catch up soon. Thank you very much for joining us at Lantern Voices today. This was a very important and meaningful conversation. I hope you're able to take what you need right now from this conversation with Jess Bugg. If you like the podcast, give us a follow on social media at Lantern PM, on Instagram at Lantern PM Official, on TikTok, and Lantern Publishing and Media on Facebook. We're also on YouTube as Lantern Publishing and Media. Follow our podcast in whatever platform you're listening to right now. Give us a rating if you like us, please. That helps us a lot. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.